The air had a taste now, a thin, metal taste, like sucking on a coin. That is how you know the scrubbers are dying. I had 4 hours left, maybe 5 if I stopped talking and stopped moving and just lay still in the dark, like a corpse waiting for its own funeral. I did not stop talking. "Say something, Owen," I said. "Anything. I don't care what." Owen Blake did not answer right away. He was folded into the corner of the crew bay, knees against his chest, one hand pressed against a rib that was probably broken. Grace Dunmore sat across from him, running her fingers along a data pad that had not worked in 6 hours, like touching it might bring it back to life through pure stubbornness. "I keep thinking about my dog," Owen finally said. "Stupid, right? Ship is dead, we are drifting in the middle of nowhere, and I am thinking about a dog." "Not stupid," I said. "Better than thinking about dying." Ben Whitfield laughed at that, a short broken sound with no humor in it. He was propped against the bulkhead near the door, his gunner's jacket stained dark down one side. He would not let anyone look at the wound. He said it was fine. It was not fine. Our ship was called the Meridian. Once, she had been something to be proud of. A heavy cruiser, fast, armed well enough to make smaller crews nervous when we passed through a checkpoint. Now she was a broken shell, tumbling slowly through a field of wreckage that used to be other ships, other crews, other people who had also once believed they would make it home. The battle had lasted 11 minutes. I know because I counted every one of them from the cockpit of my fighter, right up until something clipped my wing and sent me spinning into the Meridian's open hangar bay, half unconscious, lucky to be alive at all. When I woke up, the war was already over for us. Our fleet was gone. Our captain, Lena Voss, was in the medical bay in a stasis pod that was slowly losing power along with everything else on the ship. We were not going to be rescued. I want to say that plainly because it was the truth we all understood but nobody wanted to say out loud. The hollow drift was not a place ships passed through by accident. It was a graveyard, far from any trade route, far from any patrol line, a place where wrecks came to rest and stay forgotten. Nobody was coming to look for survivors here. As far as command knew, the Meridian and everyone on her had been destroyed in the battle. There was no reason for anyone to search a graveyard for the dead. "How much air do we actually have?" Grace asked. She always wanted the exact number. It was how she kept her hands from shaking. 4 hours, I said. Maybe 5. And after that? Nobody answered her. There was no kind way to answer that question. I looked around the crew bay at what was left of us. 4 people out of a crew that used to be over 200. 4 people and a captain in a pod that beeped a little slower every time I checked it. I had flown fighters for 6 years. I had seen ships lost before. I had never been the one trapped inside the wreck, waiting for the air to run out. I decided I would not just wait. Waiting felt like giving up, and I was not ready to give up, even with the numbers so clearly against us. "I'm going to check the auxiliary power junction again," I said, pushing myself up. My legs ached. Everything ached. "We checked it 4 times, Ben said. "It's dead, Kate. The core took a direct hit. There's nothing left to route." "Then I'll check it a 5th time." I moved through the dark corridor with a hand light that was dimmer than it should have been, because even the light's battery was rationed now. Every door I passed was sealed, either by damage or by the ship's automatic systems trying to keep whatever air we had left in as few compartments as possible. The Meridian groaned around me, metal settling the way old buildings do, like the ship itself was tired and wanted to finally lie down. I reached the junction and popped the panel, and it was exactly as dead as it had been the last 4 times. No lights, no hum, nothing. I sat back on my heels and stared at it, and for the first time since the battle, I let myself feel how frightened I actually was. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that too. I was too tired to cry, and some part of me knew that if I started, I might not stop, and there was no time for that. Instead, I just sat there, breathing air that tasted like a coin, thinking about how strange it was that this was how it would end. Not in the battle, not in the blast that took out our shields and sent my fighter spinning. just here, quietly, in the dark, waiting for numbers to run out. That is when the proximity alert went off. It was faint, barely a chime through the dying speakers, but I heard it, and I was moving before I had even decided to move. I ran back to the crew bay where the others were already sitting up, alert, scared. "Something's out there," Grace said, pointing at the one small screen that still worked, a backup display no bigger than a dinner plate, showing a single blip approaching from the edge of the debris field. "Could be more of them," Ben said quietly, coming back to finish the job. Nobody said anything to that, because nobody could rule it out. The fleet that destroyed us might have sent someone back to make sure there was nothing left worth finding. If that was true, then whatever was heading toward the Meridian right now was not coming to save us. I stared at the blip, getting closer on the tiny screen, my heart pounding harder than it had during the entire battle, and I realized that in the next few minutes, we were either going to be rescued or we were going to find out exactly how our story ended. "Everyone stay quiet," I said, though I do not know what good staying quiet would do against sensors that could already see us clearly enough to steer straight toward us. It just felt like something to say, something to hold on to. The blip stopped moving closer for a moment, hanging there at the edge of our sensor range, like whoever was flying it was deciding something. I held my breath, which was foolish, since I did not have air to spare for that kind of gesture. Owen had gone completely still beside me. Even Ben, who had spent the last hour insisting his wound was nothing, had gone pale and quiet. Then the blip started moving again, closer, steady, deliberate. Whatever it was coming straight for us, and we had no weapons, no power, no way to run, and no way to know if we were about to be saved or finished off for good. "Kate," Grace whispered, "if it's them, there's nothing we can do. We can't even close the hangar doors. We can't hide." She was right, and hearing her say it out loud made it worse, not better. I looked at the small screen again, at the blip crawling steadily through the drift field, weaving between chunks of broken hull that used to be someone's home. Whoever was flying it knew this graveyard well enough to move through it without slowing down much. That told me something. A patrol ship sent to finish off survivors would not need to know the debris field that well. A patrol ship would just fire from a distance and leave. This pilot was navigating carefully, like they had done it before, like this place was familiar to them in a way that unsettled me more than comforted me. "Maybe it's a scavenger," Owen said. His voice cracked on the word. "Someone who strips wrecks for parts. They might not even know we're alive in here." "And if they don't know," Ben said, "what happens when they find out?" Nobody answered that either. Scavengers were not always kind to witnesses. I had heard stories, the kind pilots tell each other over cheap drinks in port bars, about crews who found survivors in a wreck and decided it was easier and safer for their business to leave no one behind to talk about what they had taken. I checked the display again. The distance was closing fast now. Whatever this was, it would reach the Meridian within minutes, and there was nothing any of us could do to stop it, welcome it, or hide from it. We were 4 exhausted people and 1 dying captain, trapped inside a shell of a ship with an hour of air. I thought about my sister back home, who did not know yet that my fleet had been destroyed, who was probably going about her ordinary day without any idea that somewhere far away, in a field of broken ships, I was sitting in the dark, deciding whether the next few minutes would be my last. "Get behind the crates," I said quietly, nodding toward the stacked supply containers near the far wall. "If it's hostile, I want distance between us and the door." We moved as fast as our tired, aching bodies would allow. Ben groaned when he shifted his weight, and I saw Grace reach out automatically to steady him, the way you do for someone you have worked beside long enough to trust with your life. We settled behind the crates and waited, watching the small screen, watching the blip grow larger, listening to the Meridian creak and sigh around us like she too was holding her breath. Then the blip stopped just outside the debris field surrounding the hangar bay, and everything went still. No further movement, no sound, Just the four of us, crouched in the dark, staring at a screen the size of a dinner plate, waiting to find out what kind of visitor had found us, and whether we would live long enough to know their name. A low vibration passed through the hull a few minutes later. Something had docked. Not fired, not breached. Docked, carefully, the way you park a vehicle when you plan to walk away from it and come back later. I pressed myself flatter against the crate and gestured for the others to stay silent. Footsteps followed, slow and unhurried, echoing down the hangar deck outside the crew bay. Whoever it was did not seem to be in a rush, and did not seem to be trying to hide their approach either. That struck me as strange. An attacker sneaks. A scavenger checking for danger moves carefully but quickly. This was neither. This was someone walking through a dead ship like they had all the time in the world. The crew bay door, which had been sealed by damage for the last several hours, suddenly hissed and slid open on its own, powered by some source I could not identify. Light spilled in from a portable lamp clipped to someone's shoulder, and standing in the doorway was a man in a worn engineering jumpsuit, tool belt heavy around his waist, a scanner in one hand that he was studying more closely than he was studying us. He looked up, saw four terrified people crouched behind crates, and did not reach for a weapon. He did not even look surprised. 4 life signs, he said, mostly to himself, glancing at the scanner again. Scanner said 4, but I was hoping it was wrong, because 4 means 4 people who've been breathing bad air for way too long. "Who are you?" I said, standing slowly, keeping my body between the man and my crew, out of instinct more than any real ability to protect them. "Ethan Cole," he said, like the name should mean nothing to me, which it did not. "I run salvage out this far. Picked up a power flicker off this wreck about 6 hours ago. Figured it was just residual charge bleeding out. These old cruisers do that sometimes even after they're finished. Then I got close enough to get a proper reading and realized the flicker was coming from a working life support loop. That doesn't happen on a truly dead ship." "You're a scavenger," Ben said from behind me, his voice tight with suspicion. "I'm an independent salvager," Cole said, unbothered by the correction, or the accusation buried inside it. "Difference matters to me, even if it doesn't mean much to you right now. I strip wrecks that are actually finished. I don't strip ones with people still breathing inside them." Nobody in the room relaxed. Grace kept her hand near Ben's arm. Owen had gone very still. I did not blame any of them. We had spent the last several hours assuming that whatever came for us was either rescue or a threat, and this man fit neither category cleanly. He did not wear a uniform I recognized. His ship, from what little I had seen on the scanner, was small, unarmed as far as I could tell, nothing like a warship sent by any fleet, ours or theirs. "How did you even get in here?" I asked. "The hangar doors don't have power." "They do now," Cole said. "I ran a line from my ship into your auxiliary junction on my way in. Basic bridge feed, enough to get a door open and keep a light running. Wasn't hard. Your junction box is intact. It's just been sitting there with nothing to draw from." I thought of the junction I had checked 5 times in the dark, convinced it was permanently dead, and felt something twist uncomfortably in my chest. It had not been dead. It had simply had nothing feeding it. I had been so certain there was nothing left to save that I had stopped imagining what someone with the right tools and the right knowledge might be able to do with what remained. "Why would you bother?" Owen asked, still wary, "with a wreck like this? There's nothing valuable enough here to be worth the risk of hostile patrols finding you." Cole crouched down, setting his scanner on the deck, and looked around the crew bay slowly, the way you look at a house you are considering buying, not the way you look at a pile of scrap. "Every wreck's worth something to somebody," he said, "but that's not why I stopped. I stopped because your life support was still running. That means someone in here wanted to survive badly enough to keep it going on fumes. I don't walk past that, never have." "You don't even know us," I said. "Didn't need to," Cole said simply. "I heard a heartbeat where there shouldn't have been one. That was enough." I studied him for a long moment, trying to decide if I believed him, if this quiet stranger with tired eyes and a scanner in his hand was really as simple as he made himself sound, or if there was some angle I was missing, some reason a person would risk crossing a graveyard field alone for 4 strangers and a captain in a failing stasis pod. "Our captain is in the medical bay," I said finally, deciding that whatever his reasons were, we did not have the luxury of turning away help. "Her stasis pod is losing power faster than we are. If you can get her more time, we'll trust you with anything you want to know." Cole nodded once, already reaching for his tool bag. "Then let's go see what we're working with," he said, "because from what my scanner just told me about the state of your reactor, we don't have a lot of time to waste standing around getting to know each other." That was the first time I saw him work, and it was the first time I understood that whatever Ethan Cole was, ordinary was not the right word for it. We led him through the dark corridors toward the medical bay, our handlights bouncing off scorched walls and burst pipes. He moved through the wreckage like he was reading a map only he could see, occasionally pausing to run his scanner over a section of wall or a bundle of cables, muttering numbers to himself that meant nothing to me but seemed to mean everything to him. "Your captain's pod is running on a battery smaller than the one in my boots," he said when we reached the medical bay and he got his first proper look at the stasis unit. Captain Lena Voss lay inside it, pale, unmoving, a faint light pulsing slower than it should on the display above her head. Maybe 40 minutes left before it drops below the threshold that keeps her stable. "Can you fix it?" I asked. "Can't fix a battery that's already spent," Cole said, already pulling a coil of cable from his bag. "But I can feed it, same as I did with your hangar door. I just need a path from my ship's reserve cells to this room, and I need it fast." He worked with a speed that startled me, stripping insulation from cable ends with a small blade, splicing connections with hands that clearly had done this exact kind of repair more times than he could count. Grace crouched beside him almost immediately, asking questions, handing him tools before he even asked for them, her engineer's instincts overriding her earlier suspicion the moment she saw real technical skill in front of her. "You trained on ships like this?" Grace asked. "Trained on whatever was in front of me," Cole said. "Cruisers, freighters, old mining rigs, doesn't matter. A power system is a power system once you understand what it's trying to do. This one's trying to keep one person alive on almost nothing. That's a problem I can work with." Within 20 minutes, the pulsing light above Captain Voss steadied and grew brighter. The faint hum of the stasis pod deepened, more solid than the thin whine it had been producing before. Cole checked the readout and let out a breath I had not realized he was holding. "She's stable," he said. "Not awake, not out of danger completely, but stable. That buys her days instead of minutes." I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time since the battle had ended. It was such a small thing, a battery fed by a stranger's cable, and yet it was the first good news any of us had received since our shields had failed. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it more than those 2 words could carry. Cole waved it off, already turning his attention back to his scanner. "Don't thank me yet. Your captain's stable, but your whole ship is still bleeding air, and bleeding it faster than my little reserve cells can keep up with forever. If we want everyone breathing easy instead of counting hours, we need to look at your reactor." "The reactor took a direct hit," Owen said. "We already checked. It's gone." "Everything looks gone in the dark, with no diagnostic power," Cole said, not unkindly, but firmly, like a teacher correcting a student who had given up on a problem too early. "Let's go actually look instead of assuming." We walked to the reactor deck together, and I watched Ben trail a little slower than the rest of us, still favoring his side, still insisting he was fine every time someone asked. Cole noticed too. He did not say anything about it directly, but I saw him glance at Ben's jacket, at the dark stain that had not gotten any smaller, and I saw something shift in his expression, some private decision being made. When we reached the reactor chamber, Cole stopped in the doorway and simply looked at the space for a long moment before stepping inside. The core itself sat dark and silent in its housing, surrounded by twisted support struts and blackened panels where the impact had struck. It looked, to my untrained eye, exactly as dead as Owen had said it was. Cole crouched beside it anyway, running his scanner slowly across the surface, section by section, patient in a way that felt almost strange given how little time we had left before the ship's remaining air ran out completely. "Core casing's cracked," he said after a while, "but the containment field generator underneath it is intact. That's the part everyone assumes is destroyed because it's buried under all this damage, but it's actually the toughest component on the whole ship. It's built to survive exactly this kind of hit. So it's not dead," Grace said slowly, hope creeping into her voice for the first time since I had met her hours ago, crouched in fear behind a stack of crates. "It's not dead," Cole confirmed. "It's asleep, and it's buried under a lot of debris that's going to take real work to clear. But asleep and dead are two very different problems, and I only know how to fix one of them." I looked at the ruined chamber around us, at the scale of the damage, at how much work it would take to clear even a fraction of what Cole was describing, and I felt a flicker of doubt creep back into my chest. "This could take days," I said, "maybe longer, and we don't know if anyone's still looking for this wreck, whoever attacked us in the first place." Cole stood, brushing dust off his knees, and looked at each of us in turn, his expression calm in a way that I would come to recognize as entirely his own, a kind of steadiness that did not come from confidence alone, but from simply having decided, somewhere along the way, that quitting was never actually an option worth considering. "Then we'd better get started," he said, "because a ship like this doesn't fix itself, and I didn't come all this way to leave the job half-finished." I did not know it yet, standing there in that ruined chamber with a stranger who had walked uninvited into our dying ship and calmly decided to save it, but that sentence would turn out to describe exactly who Ethan Cole was, in every situation I would ever see him face. "Before we start," I said, "I need to know something. Why are you really doing this? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. And every hour you spend here is an hour you're not spending on your own ship, doing whatever it is you normally do out here." Cole thought about the question longer than I expected, like it deserved an honest answer instead of a quick one. "Where I come from," he said finally, "we don't have a great record of leaving things behind just because they look finished. Ships, people, doesn't matter. If there's a chance, even a small one, most of us can't walk away from it clean. It sits with you, so I don't walk away. Simple as that." "That's not simple," Ben said quietly from the doorway, still favoring his side. "That's going to get you killed one day." "Maybe," Cole said, shrugging like the thought did not bother him nearly as much as it should have. "But not today. Today we've got a reactor to wake up, a wounded man who needs looking at properly, and a captain who deserves better than dying in a box because nobody was willing to try. So let's get to work." He turned to Ben directly then, his tone shifting, gentler but no less firm. "And you're coming with me first, before anything else. That side of yours has waited long enough." Ben opened his mouth to argue, the same way he had been arguing for hours that he was fine, and then simply stopped, some of the fight draining out of him all at once, like Cole's steady insistence had finally given him permission to admit how much pain he was actually in. That was the moment I understood we were not just being rescued. We were being led by a man who had walked into our disaster carrying nothing but a scanner, a tool bag, and a stubbornness that did not seem to have any limit at all. Cole tended to Ben's wound first, cleaning and sealing it with supplies from his own ship, working with the same steady confidence he had shown at the reactor. It was a deep cut, not fatal, but close enough to dangerous that Grace went pale when she finally saw it properly under a real light. Cole did not scold Ben for hiding it. He simply fixed what could be fixed and moved on, the way he seemed to approach every problem he touched. Once Ben was resting, breathing easier, color slowly returning to his face, Cole gathered the rest of us near the reactor chamber and laid out a plan on a cracked data slate, sketching diagrams with quick, sure strokes. "Here's where we stand," he said. "Your reactor core is intact under the debris, like I said, but even once we clear it, It won't restart on its own. It needs a sequence. Power routed in a specific order, cooling systems brought online before the core itself, or you risk a cascade failure that finishes the job the battle started. It's not fast. It's not easy, but it is possible. How long? I asked. Realistically. 3 days if everything goes right, Cole said. Longer if it doesn't, and things rarely go right the first time on a ship this damaged. 3 days felt like both nothing and forever. Nothing, because our air situation was already fragile, even with Cole's reserve cells feeding the life support loop. Forever, because every hour we spent drifting in the hollow drift was another hour someone hostile might stumble across us, the same way Cole had. We'll help, Grace said immediately, already reaching for a toolkit. Tell us what to do. Cole looked at her, at me, at Owen standing quietly behind us, and something in his expression softened, like he had expected to be doing this work alone and was pleasantly surprised to be wrong. All right, he said, let's clear this debris first. Careful work, not fast work. I'll show you where to cut and where not to touch. What followed was unlike anything I had done in 6 years of service. We worked in shifts, resting only when our bodies forced us to, moving twisted metal and burnt panels away from the reactor housing, piece by piece, under Cole's careful direction. He never once raised his voice, even when Owen made a mistake early on and nearly disconnected a line that would have flooded the chamber with a chemical coolant none of us were prepared to handle. Cole simply caught his hand, showed him the correct line, and explained calmly why the mistake could have been serious, without a trace of anger in his voice. You're not going to yell at him? I asked quietly later, when Owen had stepped away to rest. Yelling doesn't fix a wire, Cole said. It just makes people afraid to try again. I'd rather he learns and keeps helping than gets scared off and stops. I thought about that for a long time afterward. In my experience, mistakes on a ship, especially dangerous ones, usually earned sharp words, sometimes worse. Cole's patience was not softness. I came to understand that quickly. It was simply that he valued getting the job done, together, over anything else, including his own frustration. By the end of the first day, we had cleared enough debris to expose the containment field generator fully. Cole ran his scanner over it again, longer this time, checking readings from every angle. Good news, he said. It's better shape than I hoped. We can start cooling sequence tomorrow. And the bad news? I asked, because there was always bad news with him, delivered just as calmly as the good. Your ship's hull has 3 more breaches than my first scan showed, he said. Small ones, but they're bleeding what little pressurized air we've managed to build back up. We patch those tonight, or none of this reactor work matters, because you'll all suffocate before the core ever comes back online. So we patched hull breaches instead of sleeping that night, Cole moving between us with sealant guns and patch kits pulled from his own ship's stores, teaching Grace and Owen how to identify stress points along the hull that were likely to fail next. I worked beside him at the largest breach, holding a light steady while he welded a patch into place, sparks scattering around us in the dark. You do this a lot? I asked him, watching his hands move with practiced ease. Fixing wrecks nobody else wants? More than most people would consider reasonable, he said, a faint smile crossing his tired face. There's good money in parts, sure. Plenty of salvagers make a living stripping dead ships clean and selling what's left. But I never liked that work much. Felt like giving up on something before you'd really tried. Even when the thing looks completely finished. Especially then, he said. Anybody can walk away from something that's obviously fine. Anybody can walk away from something that's obviously gone too. It's the ones in between, the ones that look dead but aren't quite, that most people give up on too early. That's where I like to work. I found myself watching him more carefully after that, trying to understand what kind of person chose this life on purpose, alone, far from any of the comforts most people wanted, spending his days convincing broken things they were not actually finished yet. The second day brought harder problems. The cooling system, once cleared and powered, revealed a cracked regulator that Cole had not caught on his first scan, buried too deep in the housing to detect properly. It was, by his own admission, a serious complication. Without a working regulator, he explained, gathered with the rest of us around the open housing, we can't safely bring the core past a quarter of its normal output. That's enough for life support and basic systems. It is not enough for weapons or a jump drive. So we'd be stuck here, Owen said, alive but stuck. Unless I build a replacement, Cole said, already digging through his tool bag with the focused calm of someone who had already begun solving the problem before finishing his sentence. I've got parts on my ship that weren't designed for this exact use, but with enough adjustment, they'll do the job. It'll take most of today and tonight. Do you always carry spare parts for problems you haven't found yet? Grace asked, half amused despite her exhaustion. I carry spare parts for problems I haven't found yet, because that's the whole job, Cole said, already walking toward the corridor that led back to his own ship. Nothing ever breaks the way you expect. You just have to bring enough options that something in your bag fits the gap when you find it. He worked through the night building the replacement regulator, and I found myself unable to sleep, drawn instead to sit near him in the dim reactor chamber, watching him carefully shape and test each component by hand. He talked while he worked, not about anything important, just small stories about other wrecks he had restored, other crews he had helped, told without pride, almost as if he was surprised each time that anyone found his work remarkable at all. There was a mining freighter once, he said, testing a connection with careful fingers. Worse off than this, honestly. Crew of 6, trapped for 9 days before I found them. Everyone told me afterward I was foolish to keep searching that long. I just couldn't make myself believe 6 people were gone until I'd actually confirmed it myself. Were they alive? I asked. All 6, he said, a small, tired smile crossing his face. Barely, but alive. That's usually how it goes. The margin between lost and saved is thinner than people think, if somebody's willing to keep looking. By the time the sun of some distant, uninvolved star rose over the debris field, marked only by a faint change in the ambient light through a cracked viewport, Cole had finished the replacement regulator. He fitted it into place with the exhausted precision of someone running on willpower alone, and when the readings finally settled into stable numbers, he allowed himself, for the first time since arriving, to sit back against the reactor housing and simply breathe. That's the hard part done, he said quietly. Tomorrow we bring the core online properly. If it holds, you'll have real power again. Shields, maneuvering thrusters, maybe even enough for a short jump if we're careful. And if it doesn't hold? I asked, unable to stop myself from asking, even though some part of me already suspected his answer. Then we try again, Cole said simply, closing his eyes for just a moment, because that's the only thing I know how to do when something's worth saving. I sat there in the dim light beside a man who had crossed a graveyard of broken ships for no reason except that he could not stand to leave 4 strangers and a dying captain behind, and I understood, more clearly than I had understood anything in a long time, that whatever the hollow drift had taken from us in that battle, it had also given us something rare in return. None of us knew yet that our greatest test was still ahead, waiting quietly beyond the debris field, drawn slowly toward the very energy signature Cole's work was about to bring back to life. We gathered around the reactor control station the next morning, all 5 of us crowded into a space meant for 2 engineers, watching Cole's hands move across a panel that had been dark and silent for days. Even Ben stood with us, moving carefully but on his own feet, insisting he would not miss this for anything. Once I start this sequence, Cole said, there's no clean way to stop it partway through. We either bring the core up slow and steady, or we shut it down completely and start over from cold. So I need everyone quiet, and I need everyone watching their assigned readout. If anything spikes red, you call it out immediately. Understood? We nodded, and Cole began. The first stage was almost anticlimactic, a low-hum building somewhere deep beneath the deck plating, so faint I felt it more than heard it, a vibration traveling up through my boots. Grace watched her readout intently, calling out numbers in a steady voice as pressure built gradually in the coolant lines Cole had repaired days earlier. "Coolant flow steady," she said. "No leaks detected." "Good," Cole said, adjusting a dial with careful, small movements. "Now we bring containment field strength up to match. Slow, always slow." The lights above us flickered once, then steadied, casting a warmer glow across the chamber than the emergency lighting we had grown used to. Somewhere further down the ship, a low mechanical groan signaled systems waking that had been silent for far too long. "Life support just switched off my reserve feed," Cole said, checking a separate display. "It's running on your own power now. That's the ship breathing on her own again, not borrowed air anymore." I felt something tighten in my throat at that, an emotion I had not expected, watching numbers climb steadily on a screen that represented far more than simple statistics. It represented air we would not have to ration. It represented a captain's stasis pod that would no longer depend on a stranger's spare batteries. It represented, however small the margin still was, a chance. "Containment field at 60%, Owen read aloud, holding steady. "Keep going," Cole murmured, more to himself than to us, his eyes fixed on the readouts with total focus. "Come on, hold together." The chamber grew warmer as minutes passed, filled with the low hum of machinery finally doing what it was built to do. Cole worked without pause, adjusting, checking, correcting small fluctuations before they could become larger problems, narrating just enough for the rest of us to understand what was happening without slowing his own concentration. "Containment field at 90%, Grace said, and I heard the disbelief in her own voice, like she had not truly expected to say those words out loud again. "Almost there," Cole said. "Last stage is the trickiest. We bring core output up to operational levels. If the regulator holds, we're done. If it doesn't, we'll know immediately, and we shut down hard and fast." He glanced at each of us in turn, his expression steady despite the exhaustion clearly written across his face after 2 sleepless nights of work. "Ready?" We all nodded, and Cole pushed the final sequence forward. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, deliberately, the core readout climbed, 10%, then 20, then 40, numbers rising steadily without a single warning light flashing red. The hum deepened into something solid and reassuring, a sound I realized I had missed without even knowing it, the sound of a warship actually alive beneath your feet, instead of simply floating, broken, through empty space. "Core output stable at full operational capacity," Cole said finally, and something in his voice cracked slightly with relief. He had clearly been holding back through the entire process. "She's alive." The chamber erupted into something between laughter and disbelief. Grace hugged Owen without seeming to think about it. Ben, still favoring his side, grinned wider than I had seen since before the battle. I found myself simply staring at the humming core, unable to fully process that 3 days ago I had been counting down the final hours of breathable air, and now I was standing inside a ship with full power running through her again. "You did it," I said to Cole, my voice unsteady in a way that embarrassed me slightly. "You actually did it." "We did it," he corrected gently. "I just knew where to start looking." Captain Voss's stasis pod, when we checked it minutes later, was humming with the same steady strength as the rest of the ship, her vital signs finally climbing toward numbers that suggested real recovery instead of fragile survival. For the first time since the battle, I allowed myself to believe we might actually make it out of the hollow drift, might actually see our fleet's home base again, might actually get to tell this story instead of simply becoming another wreck lost to a graveyard nobody searched. That belief lasted almost exactly 11 minutes. It was Grace who noticed it first, her attention drawn back to a secondary display she had not thought to check in the celebration, one that monitored outward sensor sweeps rather than internal systems. "Kate," she said, and something in her tone immediately silenced the celebration around us. "We've got a problem." I moved to her side and looked at the screen, and my stomach dropped in a way that made the last few days of hope feel suddenly, dangerously fragile. A ship, larger than Cole's, moving with the deliberate, coordinated pattern of a military patrol, had entered the edge of the hollow drift, and it was moving directly toward the exact energy signature our newly restored reactor had just begun broadcasting into open space. "How long until it reaches us?" I asked, already moving toward the tactical station out of pure instinct, years of training taking over before my mind had fully caught up with the danger. "At that speed," Grace said, running quick calculations, "maybe 18 minutes." 18 minutes. I looked around the reactor chamber at the crew who seconds earlier had been celebrating survival, now standing frozen with the same fear that had gripped us during those first dark hours after the battle. Cole was already moving, though, pulling up a schematic of the Meridian on the nearest working display, his exhausted expression replaced by something sharper, more focused. "Talk to me," he said, looking at me directly. "What can this ship actually do right now? Not what she used to do. What can she do in the next 18 minutes? "Core's stable," I said, forcing my voice steady even as my heart pounded. "But weapons systems haven't been checked since the battle. Shields are theoretical at best. We don't even know if the engines will respond." "Then we find out fast," Cole said. "Owen, Ben, get to the engine room and see what response you get from basic maneuvering thrusters. Grace, stay on that sensor feed and give me updates every 60 seconds. Kate, with me, we're going to see what we can squeeze out of the shield generators." Nobody questioned him. There was no time to question him, and honestly, none of us wanted to. In the space of a few days, this stranger had become the only person among us who seemed to know exactly what to do next, and right now, that certainty was worth more than rank or experience. We ran together through corridors that, days earlier, had been dark and silent, now humming faintly with restored power, toward the shield generator room tucked behind the reactor deck. Cole moved with a speed that surprised me given how little sleep he had gotten over the last 3 days, his focus entirely narrowed onto the problem in front of him. "Generator's intact," he said, scanning it quickly, "but it's never going to reach full strength in 18 minutes. Best we can do is a partial shield, enough to absorb a few glancing hits, not enough to survive sustained fire." "That might be enough," I said, "if we can get the engines working and put distance between us before they're close enough to fire accurately." "That's the plan," Cole said, already adjusting connections inside the generator housing with quick, practiced movements. "Buy enough time to run, not enough to fight. This ship isn't ready for a fight. Not today." Grace's voice crackled over the comm system Cole had rigged days earlier from spare parts. "Patrol ship is 14 minutes out. They've increased speed. I think they've locked onto our energy signature directly. They know exactly where we are," I said quietly, more to myself than to Cole. "Doesn't matter," Cole said, not looking up from his work. "What matters is whether we're gone before they arrive close enough to matter." We worked in tense silence for several minutes, broken only by Grace's steady updates counting down the approaching patrol ship's distance, each report shaving away at the fragile calm we had all been clinging to since the reactor came online. My hands moved automatically, following Cole's instructions, splicing a secondary line into the shield generator to boost its output even slightly beyond what it should have been capable of producing. 10 minutes, Grace announced. Owen's voice came through next, breathless from running. "Engines are responding. Basic maneuvering only. Nothing fancy, but she'll move." "That's enough," Cole said. "Kate, get to the helm. The moment shields are partially online, I want distance between us and that patrol ship immediately." I ran without answering, my legs burning from exhaustion that had not fully left my body since the battle days earlier. Adrenaline the only thing keeping me upright as I reached the bridge and dropped into the pilot's seat, hands moving across controls I had not touched since the moment my fighter had spun wildly into this very hangar bay. 7 minutes, Grace's voice reported, tighter now, the strain clear even through the comm static. "Shields at 40%, Cole reported from below. That's all you're getting, Kate. Make it count. I engaged the maneuvering thrusters, and the Meridian shuddered beneath me, groaning like an old animal forced awake too soon. But she moved, slowly at first, then with gathering speed, pulling away from the debris field that had been our tomb and our shelter both. 5 minutes, Grace called. They're adjusting course to intercept. They're not going to catch a moving target easily in this debris field, Cole said, appearing on the bridge himself now, breathing hard from the run-up from the generator room. Kate, use the wreckage, weave through it. Slows them down more than it slows us, since we know this field now and they don't. I did exactly that, guiding the Meridian between broken hulls and drifting fragments of long-dead ships, using every scrap of the graveyard that had almost become our own grave as cover against the patrol closing in behind us. 3 minutes, Grace said, and then, a moment later, in a voice tight with fear, they're powering weapons. Brace for impact, Cole said calmly, gripping the console beside me. And Kate, whatever happens, keep flying. Don't stop moving, not for anything. The first shot came moments later, a bright flash against our aft shields that shook the entire ship, alarms flaring briefly before Grace's voice confirmed, shaking, that the shields had held, barely, absorbing the hit exactly the way Cole had predicted they might. One more like that, Cole said, and we lose shields completely. Then let's make sure there isn't a second one, I said, pulling the Meridian into a sharp turn around a massive broken hull section, putting solid wreckage between us and the patrol ship's direct line of fire, buying us precious seconds while their own ship was forced to adjust course around the same obstacle. Jump drive, Cole said suddenly, turning to look at me with something sharp and urgent in his expression. Does this ship have one intact? It should, I said, but nobody's checked it since the battle. We don't even know if it survived. Then we're about to find out, Cole said, already moving toward the small auxiliary station near the helm, fingers flying across controls, pulling up a system that had been dormant since long before he had ever arrived. Give me 2 minutes. We might not have 2 minutes, I said, watching the patrol ship's position on my display, closing steadily despite the debris field slowing them slightly. Then I'll need less than 2 minutes, Cole said, and somehow, impossibly, exhausted after 3 sleepless days spent bringing an entire ship back from the dead, he began working through the jump drive calibration with the same steady, unshaken focus he had shown at every single obstacle since the moment he had first walked through our crew bay door. I kept flying, weaving the Meridian through wreckage that had once been other ships, other crews who had run out of luck long before we ever arrived, praying silently that we would not become another piece of debris in this graveyard before Cole finished whatever impossible thing he was about to attempt. 1 minute, Grace called out, her voice barely steady. They're clearing the debris field. Direct line of fire in 30 seconds. Cole, I said, not taking my eyes off the controls. Talk to me. Drive's responding, he said, sweat visible on his forehead, despite the chill of the bridge. Coordinates are locked to the nearest safe jump point, but the calibration sequence needs a few more seconds to align properly. Jump too early with a bad alignment, and we could tear this ship apart worse than any weapon could. We don't have a few more seconds, I said, watching the patrol ship emerge fully from behind the wreckage on my display, weapons already glowing with the telltale charge of an imminent shot. Then give me evasive maneuvers, Cole said, the hardest ones you've got. Every second you buy me matters. I pulled the Meridian into the tightest turn I had ever attempted in a ship this size, alarms screaming around us as the hull groaned under the strain, structural supports never designed for this kind of stress after days of battle damage. The patrol ship's shot streaked past us, close enough that I felt the ship shudder from the near miss, but it missed, and I pulled us immediately into another turn, refusing to give them a clean line twice in a row. Almost there, Cole said, his hands steady despite everything happening around us. 10 seconds. Another shot came, and this time it did not miss cleanly. It clipped our shields directly, and Grace's voice, tight with fear, confirmed what I already felt through the shuddering deck plating beneath my boots. "Shields down to 15%, she said. "One more hit like that and we lose them completely." 5 seconds, Cole said, and I had never in my life wanted 5 seconds to move faster. I threw the Meridian into one final, desperate turn, putting the last substantial piece of wreckage in the debris field directly between us and the patrol ship's line of fire, buying Cole the exact handful of seconds he needed. "Jump ready," he said, and I heard something in his voice that was not quite relief yet, not until this actually worked. "Do it," I said. Cole engaged the sequence, and the entire ship seemed to hold its breath along with all of us, a strange, weightless moment where nothing existed except the humming pull of the jump drive, gathering enough power to tear us out of this graveyard entirely. Then space folded around us, the debris field and the patrol ship and the entire hollow-drift vanishing in a single disorienting pulse of light, replaced almost instantly by the calm, star-scattered emptiness of open space, far from anything that had been hunting us moments earlier. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge said anything at all. The only sound was the steady hum of the Meridian's engines, running smoothly now, carrying us further from danger with every passing second. "Did we make it?" Owen's voice finally asked over the comm, breathless and disbelieving. "Are we actually clear?" I checked every display in front of me twice before I allowed myself to answer, half convinced that some new disaster was waiting to prove me wrong the moment I said it out loud. "We're clear," I said finally, my voice cracking slightly on the words. "We made it." The bridge erupted into something between relieved laughter and quiet disbelief, Grace's voice over the comm mixing with sounds of celebration from the engine room where Owen and Ben had clearly heard the news at the same moment I confirmed it. I sat back in the pilot's seat, hands shaking now that there was finally nothing left to steer around, no more turns to make, no more seconds left to buy. Cole sank into the chair beside me, his exhausted body finally allowing itself to feel every one of the 3 sleepless days and the several terrifying minutes that had just passed. He looked at me, a tired but genuine smile crossing his face for the first time since he had walked uninvited through our crew bay door. "Good flying," he said simply. "Good everything," I said, because there was no smaller way to say what I actually meant. He had walked into a dying wreck for no reason except that he could not stand to leave people behind, and in 3 days, working almost entirely without rest, he had turned that wreck back into a ship capable of outrunning a warship sent specifically to finish us off. "We should check on Captain Voss," Grace said over the comm, practical as always, even in the middle of relief. "Make sure the jump didn't disrupt her pod." "Go," Cole said to me, waving a tired hand toward the corridor. "I'll hold the bridge a few minutes. I think I've earned a moment to just sit still." I left him there, slumped in the chair beside the helm, eyes closed, chest rising and falling slowly, in the first real rest he had allowed himself since he first found our energy signature flickering weakly in a graveyard nobody was supposed to search. Walking down the corridor toward the medical bay, I found myself thinking that whatever reputation people back home whispered about men and women like Cole, stubborn, reckless, unable to leave anything unfinished, none of it had prepared me for what it actually felt like to be on the receiving end of that particular kind of stubbornness. It felt, more than anything else, like being given a second chance nobody thought we deserved, delivered by a stranger who had never once asked what we could offer him in return. Captain Voss woke 2 days later, somewhere in open space between the hollow drift and the nearest Allied outpost, a journey Cole calculated carefully to avoid any further patrol routes that might still be searching for wreckage in the region. I was sitting beside her stasis pod when the readouts shifted, her eyes opening slowly, confused at first, then sharpening as awareness returned. "Report," she said, her voice rough from days of silence, the single word carrying all the authority of a captain even through obvious exhaustion. I gave her everything: the battle, the drift, the failing air, Cole's arrival, the 3 days spent bringing the reactor back to life, the patrol ship, the desperate jump that had finally carried us to safety. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable until I finished, and then she asked the one question I had been waiting for. "Where is this man now?" "Bridge," I said. "He's barely left it since the jump. Keeps saying he wants to make sure the navigation stays steady, but I think mostly he just doesn't know how to stop working once he's started something." Captain Voss managed something close to a smile despite her exhaustion. "Bring him to me. I want to thank him properly, and I want to understand exactly who decided 4 strangers and their dying captain were worth risking his own ship for." I found Cole exactly where I expected, on the bridge, monitoring readouts with the same quiet focus he had shown from the very first moment he stepped through our crew bay door. He looked better than he had 2 days earlier, having finally allowed himself real sleep once the jump was confirmed stable, but there was still a tiredness in him that felt like it went deeper than exhaustion, the kind that comes from a life spent constantly reaching toward things other people had already decided to give up on. "Captain wants to see you," I told him. "She's awake," he said, not a question, relief clear in his voice. Good. I was starting to worry that Pod took more damage during the jump than the readouts showed. "You worry about everything," I said, half amused despite everything we had been through together. "Somebody has to," he said, standing and stretching muscles that had clearly been held too tense for too many days. "Otherwise, things fall apart before anyone notices." Captain Voss received him in the medical bay, still resting in the stasis pod that had kept her alive, but alert now, sharp-eyed despite her weakened body. She studied Cole for a long moment before speaking, the way commanding officers study anyone whose actions they have not yet fully understood. "Kate tells me you spent 3 days without proper rest, bringing my ship back from what should have been a total loss," she said, "and that you did it for 4 strangers you had never met, with no guarantee any of us would survive long enough to thank you, let alone repay you." "That's about right," Cole said simply. "Why?" she asked, the same question I had asked him myself, back in that ruined reactor chamber, though her tone carried the weight of command behind it, expecting a full answer rather than the short one Cole always seemed to prefer. Cole considered the question seriously, the way he considered every question put to him, never rushing toward an easy response. "I've spent most of my life around wrecks," he said finally. "Ships people gave up on too soon, crews written off as lost before anyone actually confirmed it. Somewhere along the way, I decided I wasn't going to be the kind of person who assumes something is finished just because it looks finished on the surface. Your ship looked finished. Your crew looked finished. Neither one actually was. Not completely, not yet. That's the only difference between wreckage worth stripping for parts and a ship worth saving. Somebody has to be willing to look closer before deciding which one you're looking at." Captain Voss was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an expression I could not fully read, something between respect and genuine surprise. "Most people," she said eventually, "would have looked at the readings from a distance, seen a dead energy signature in a graveyard full of them, and moved on without a second thought. That would have been the reasonable choice. Nobody would have blamed you for making it." "Reasonable isn't always right," Cole said. "Sometimes it's just easier." I watched the exchange from the doorway, thinking about how strange it was that a man who clearly could have simply moved on, who had every reasonable justification to leave a dead-looking wreck exactly where he found it, had instead spent 3 sleepless days fighting to prove that reasonable assumption wrong. There was something almost defiant in it, a quiet refusal to let convenience decide who lived and who did not, and I found myself wondering how many other wrecks, scattered across graveyards like the Hollow Drift, held survivors nobody had ever bothered to look closely enough to find. The rest of the journey to the outpost passed quietly, the crew slowly recovering their strength as the Meridian carried us steadily through open space. Ben's wound healed cleanly under Cole's careful attention, the scar barely noticeable within days. Owen and Grace spent hours with Cole in the engine room, absorbing everything he was willing to teach them about coaxing life back into systems everyone else had already written off, questions and answers passing between them long after the actual repairs were finished, simply because they wanted to understand how he thought, not just what he did. I spent most evenings on the bridge with Cole, watching the stars pass outside the viewport, talking about smaller things now that the immediate danger had passed. He told me about other wrecks he had found over the years, other crews he had pulled back from the edge of loss, always with the same quiet modesty, never once suggesting that any of it made him remarkable. "Doesn't it get exhausting?" I asked him one evening, constantly choosing the harder path, constantly refusing to let things go. "Sometimes," he admitted, "there have been wrecks I couldn't save, crews I found too late, no matter how fast I moved. Those stay with you longer than the ones you manage to fix, but I'd rather carry those than wonder, for the rest of my life, what might have happened if I just kept walking past something that still had a chance." "And this time," I said, "we were that chance." "This time," he agreed, "you were." We reached the Allied outpost 6 days after Cole first found us drifting in the hollow drift, the Meridian limping in under her own power, battered but whole, carrying a crew that everyone at the outpost had already assumed lost, along with the rest of the destroyed fleet. Word spread quickly once we docked, officers and medical staff hurrying toward the ship the moment our identification confirmed exactly who we were supposed to be, people believed dead for nearly a week. Captain Voss, recovered enough to stand on her own by the time we docked, insisted on making a formal statement to the outpost commander before anything else happened, ensuring that Cole's role in our survival was recorded properly, not quietly forgotten the way independent salvagers sometimes were in official reports. "This man brought my ship back from complete destruction," she said, standing beside Cole in front of the outpost's senior staff, her voice carrying the full authority of her rank, despite her obvious exhaustion. "He risked his own vessel entering a debris field known to attract hostile patrols. He worked 3 days without meaningful rest. Every person standing here owes him a debt that a formal report can never properly repay, but I intend to make sure it's recorded accurately regardless." Cole shifted uncomfortably under the attention, clearly far more at ease elbow-deep in a broken reactor than standing in front of officers offering him formal recognition. "I just did what needed doing," he said, the same simple explanation he had offered every single time someone asked him why. Ship still had good bones, crew still had a chance, wasn't going to walk away from either one. The outpost commander, a woman with sharp eyes that had clearly seen more than her share of both loss and unexpected rescue over the years, studied Cole for a long moment before speaking. "We hear stories out here," she said, "about independent salvagers who do exactly what you did, over and over, in places most people wouldn't risk entering, even with a full military escort. Some call it recklessness. I've started calling it something else." "What's that?" Cole asked. "Refusal," she said simply. "A refusal to accept that something's finished just because it looks that way. I've seen it before, in others like you, and I imagine I'll see it again. It's rare. It matters more than people realize, especially out here, where the space between rescued and lost is thinner than anyone likes to admit." I stood beside Grace, Owen, and Ben, watching Cole receive praise he clearly did not know how to accept gracefully, and I thought about everything that had happened since the moment our proximity alert chimed weakly through dying speakers in a graveyard nobody was supposed to search. I thought about how close we had come to simply becoming another piece of wreckage, forgotten among 1,000 others, if not for one person's refusal to accept that conclusion without looking closer first. That evening, the outpost held a small gathering in the mess hall, nothing formal, just crews from other ships mixing with our own, curious about the story that had already begun spreading through the docking bays. Ben stood taller than I had seen him stand since the battle, his wound fully healed, telling anyone who would listen about the moment Cole had calmly diagnosed a cracked regulator nobody else had caught, as if he were describing something as thrilling as the battle itself. "You should have seen him," Ben said to a group of curious engineers from another crew. "Man walks into a dead ship with nothing but a tool bag, and 3 days later we're outrunning a patrol cruiser. Didn't even raise his voice once, the whole time. Grace, sitting nearby with a data pad already filled with notes from everything Cole had taught her, looked up at the mention of his name. He said something to me, the first night we were clearing debris around the reactor, said mistakes weren't worth yelling over, because yelling just makes people afraid to try again. I've been thinking about that ever since, wondering how many good engineers get talked out of the job by people who forgot that lesson. "You're going to be a good one," I told her, and I meant it. Something had changed in her over those 3 days, a confidence that had not been there before, built not from praise but from being trusted to actually contribute to something impossible. Owen, quieter than the others, sat turning a small tool over in his hands, one Cole had given him after their first mistake with the coolant line, the same mistake that could have flooded the chamber if not for Cole's quick hands. "He gave me this before he left the reactor room the first night," Owen said. "Told me every engineer keeps at least one tool that reminds them of the first big mistake they didn't make twice. Said it was more valuable than any medal." I thought about that phrase for a long time afterward, how Cole seemed to measure value differently than most people I had known, weighing things not by how they looked to others, but by what they actually meant to the person holding them. A tool that prevented a second mistake, a ship given a second chance instead of a scrapyard, a crew allowed to keep existing instead of becoming another quiet statistic in a war that produced far too many of them. Captain Voss found me later that evening, standing near the viewport that looked out over the docking bays, watching the quiet activity of an outpost that had, for one evening, allowed itself to celebrate something good in the middle of an otherwise difficult war. "I've filed the official report," she said, standing beside me. "Full commendation for civilian assistance. Formal request that Cole receive recognition and compensation for the vessel repairs and medical support he provided. Whether the fleet actually processes that kind of paperwork quickly is another matter entirely, but the record will show exactly what happened out there, accurately, for whatever that's worth." "Do you think he cares about the recognition?" I asked her. "No," she said, without hesitation. "I don't think he does. I think men like him do what they do regardless of whether anyone writes it down afterward. But I care about it, because crews like mine deserve to know that this kind of person exists, and that when everything looks finished, it sometimes isn't, not if somebody's willing to look closer." She was quiet for a moment, watching the docking bay activity below us. "I've served for 23 years, she continued. "I've seen good crews lost to bad luck, and I've seen bad decisions somehow work out through sheer chance. What I don't see very often is someone choosing, deliberately, over and over, to make the harder choice simply because it's the right one. That's rarer than people think, and rarer still that it happens to land in your favor when you need it most." I nodded, unable to find words that felt adequate to everything I had witnessed over the past week, and instead simply stood beside her, watching the quiet outpost below, thinking about how close we had all come to never seeing this ordinary evening at all. Before Cole left the outpost to return to his own ship and whatever wreck needed finding next, I found him alone near the docking bay, checking over his small vessel with the same careful attention he gave everything he touched. "You could stay," I said. "Officially, I mean. The fleet would take you in a heartbeat after what you did. Steady work, steady pay, none of this constant searching through graveyards alone." Cole smiled, shaking his head slowly. "Steady work isn't really what I'm built for. There's always another wreck out there, somewhere nobody's bothered to check closely enough. Can't stop looking just because one turned out well." "Will we see you again?" I asked, and I realized as I said it how much I actually wanted the answer to be yes. "Depends on how many more times your fleet manages to get itself stranded in dangerous graveyards," he said, a teasing edge to his voice that told me he was joking, mostly. "But space is smaller than people think, once you've crossed paths with someone once. Wouldn't rule it out." He climbed into his ship, and I watched from the docking bay window as he pulled away from the outpost, small and unremarkable against the vast backdrop of open space, heading back out toward whatever graveyard or drift field might be hiding another wreck, another crew nobody else had bothered to look closely enough to save. I thought about the title people back home had started using for men and women like him, whispered half as warning and half as reputation among the crews who traveled through dangerous, forgotten corners of space, the ones who never leave a ship or a person behind. I had heard that phrase before Cole found us, always attached to some vague, distant story, never anyone I had actually met myself. Now I understood exactly what it meant, because I had watched it happen, up close, over 3 impossible days that turned a graveyard tragedy into a story worth telling. Somewhere out there, in another dark and silent wreck, another crew was probably sitting exactly where we had been, air running low, hope running lower, convinced that nobody was coming for them. I liked to think, watching Cole's small ship shrink into the distance beyond the viewport, that somewhere out in that same vast darkness, they were about to be wrong.